It's a Big Ten takeover on the south end of the Las Vegas Strip as Sin City gets ready to host a three-day event. Reigning national champs Ohio State will be part of the first day of availability. We've got our crew at the Mandalay Bay, including our Cover 3 podcast, is checking in from Big Ten Media Days. In the meantime, we've got our guy Brad Crawford garnering his own questions ahead of Big Ten Media Days here. And let's start with the champs. There's always that talk, of course, BC, about the championship hangover. What questions do you have out there in Columbus and Dublin?
Yeah, the roster for Ohio State is brand new, and to win a second straight national championship, that means redshirt freshman quarterback Julian Sayin needs to be Will Howard-esque for this team. Really, Jeremiah Smith is the only household name offensively returning. He happens to be one of the best players in college football at the wideout spot, but we're talking about 4 new defensive linemen, 2 new starting linebackers, Caleb Downs, the only returning All-American veteran back there in the secondary for Ohio State. So if Ryan Day does, in fact, try and win a second championship, which would be the Big Ten's third, by the way, consecutively, then he's going to have to do it with a new crop of talent within that 2 deep.
And it's interesting, there were still a few buts, like, yeah, you won the national championship, but you lost to Michigan, even though you win the whole thing. But that's such life for a program like Ryan Day's. How about Dan Lanning and his Ducks?
Yeah, for the Ducks, it starts with, will these offseason pieces they've added amount to another Big Ten championship? And the big question is, when they get to the playoff, will they not have another letdown like they had last season against Ohio State? Dan Lanning said before that game that he wasn't going to talk about a bad draw or something like that. But when you're undefeated at 13-0 your first year in the Big Ten and you beat Penn State and Indy, man, that was a rough draw for the Ducks to get Ohio State in that quarterfinal matchup, the loss there. But this is a new Oregon team too. Dante Moore trying to become Oregon's 3rd consecutive starting quarterback to be a Heisman finalist, joining Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel. He's a transfer from UCLA a couple cycles ago. And they lost Evan Stewart, a wide receiver 1 who hurt his knee in April, probably going to miss the entire season. So Oregon, for the first time in a couple of years under Dan Lanning, their bread might be buttered on the other side of the ball defensively rather than have a breakneck pace on offense.
He won't publicly try to say that bracket was unfavorable to him, but I'll say it for him. It's almost like having Alcaraz and Sinner in that same bracket and watching the other side get through. All right, speaking of getting in the dance, Penn State finally got in with the expanded playoff, of course, but what about James Franklin? What question do you have for the Nittany Lions?
Can they handle the hype? This is the best college football roster James Franklin's had in his coaching tenure, previously at Vanderbilt, now at Penn State, has been there more than a decade. He's had several 11-win seasons, got to the semifinals last year with the Nittany Lions. But pretty much everybody's coming back except for a couple draft picks, including Abdul Carter. But Drew Aller could be the top pick in the 2026 NFL draft at quarterback. You've got 2,000-yard rushers in Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. You see right there, Penn State is improving into the elite realm under James Franklin. They can get there again this fall. And if you're a Penn State fan, Tommy, you're really hoping that this team can just simulate toward the end of the regular season and get back to the playoff, because Penn State has to go to Columbus in November. They just can't seem to beat the Buckeyes under James Franklin.
Yeah, it's what we talked about in terms of Oregon and Ohio State. We're now in a holding pattern in college football where you want to be the hottest team getting into the dance, not necessarily the best team and the best resume, etc. All right, let's get to Matt Rhule and the expectations that you would have for him. The good news is he kept his quarterback on campus. Dylan Rhule sticking around for him here in 25.
Yeah, Nebraska's boosters really helped Matt Rhule this offseason. They kept a couple guys in tow, including Dylan Rhule, the former 5-star signee at quarterback, and they signed a bunch of quality portal additions, including a couple wide receivers to help Dylan out. I think this is the year that you see Raiola turn into one of the premier players nationally, because he has Dana Holgorsen, former offensive guru, head coach at West Virginia, to lead an air raid style. The last couple of years, Nebraska's kind of been in the mud a little bit offensively, the Satterfield calling plays, but now I see that Dylan Raiola's a guy who can really make changes and push this team to the elite realm. And by the way, Tommy, it always matters. The schedule this season for Nebraska is one of the more favorable in college football inside the Big Ten. So Nebraska's a team that I'm buying stock in this offseason as a dark horse title contender.
Okay, Matt Rhule keeps his 15 around, who likes to emulate the other 15. They also got a neutral site game at Arrowhead, so that should be fun to watch to start the year. In terms of coaches that would come into a season with pressure, perhaps be on a hot seat, Brad, you got a couple names for me?
Mike Locksley at Maryland. He's a guy whose seat has continued to warm throughout his tenure, but last year really had a down, lackluster finish. And he's going to start a true freshman quarterback, Malik Washington, this fall against one of the toughest schedules in the country. So 4-8 could obviously happen again for Mike Locksley. One other coach I'm looking at is Lincoln Riley. Went 4-5 against Big Ten competition, despite having a pretty good roster last year in his first year in new conference. If that happens again, and he loses more games than he wins against Big Ten opponents, then LA, that job out at USC, might be one of the biggest vacancies in the 2026 cycle.
Right before I let you go, just talking sort of Big Ten macro, obviously now with the infusion of the West Coast programs, you can have a media days out in Vegas. What were your just impressions of this new look Big Ten?
I mean, I think the additions have been great so far. And then you see UCLA didn't have the year one success they wanted to under Deshaun Foster, but they got Nico Iamaleava, who led Tennessee to a playoff berth last year. That's a transfer portal addition, Tommy, this offseason that I think has been undervalued nationally. I think it's going to hurt Tennessee losing Nico, and it's going to really, really help the offense for the Bruins.
I'm glad you brought up UCLA, because for a long time they were cash-strapped. They couldn't afford to get Chip Kelly's assistants. All of a sudden, they've got this money to bring in guys like Nico. That's what Media Days is all about, and we've got some biggest questions there with Brad Crawford. BC, certainly appreciate it. Let's take a look at that schedule that CBS will have, which includes Nevada at Penn State the end of August. Then you've got Oklahoma State and Oregon, USC at Purdue, and then Michigan and Nebraska. The aforementioned Matt Rhule and Dylan Raiola at home against the Wolverines on the 20th.